Come back up with us.
No, I came to see Father.
How many times have I told you he's in King's Landing with Sansa and Arya?
He was down here. I saw him.
Saw him when?
Last night, when I was sleeping.
Hello, sweet summer children. So we've been talking about dreams in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire and what they mean. We started with Jon and his wolf weirwood dreams and dragon dreams and dreams in general and where they come from. So in my last video, we talked about Jon's Lightbringer dream, but now we will talk about and dissect one of the most important dreams. It's the reoccurring dream that Jon has that always lands him in the Crypts of Winterfell. And we're going to talk about just what I think that this dream really means. You let me know what you think it means, and I'll tell you what I think it means. Before long, he found himself talking of Winterfell. "Sometimes I dream about it," he said. "I'm walking down this long, empty hall. My voice echoes all around, but no one answers, so I walk faster, opening doors, shouting names. I don't even know who I'm looking for. Most nights it's my father, but sometimes it's Rob instead, or my little sister Arya, or my uncle." The thought of Benjen Stark saddened him. His uncle was still missing. The old bear had sent out rangers in search of him. Sir Jeremy Riker had led 2 sweeps, and Corin Halfhand had gone forth from the Shadow Tower, but they found nothing aside from a few blazes in the trees that his uncle had left to mark his way. In the stony highlands to the northwest, the marks stopped abruptly, and all traces of Ben Stark vanished. "Do you ever find anyone in your dream?" Sam asked. Jon shook his head. "No one. The castle is always empty." He had never told anyone of the dream, and he did not understand why he was telling Sam now, yet somehow it felt good to talk of it. "Even the ravens are gone from the rookery, and the stables are full of bones. That always scares me. I start to run then, throwing open doors, climbing the tower 3 steps at a time, screaming for someone, for anyone, and then I find myself in front of the door to the crypts. It's black inside, and I can see the steps spiraling down. Somehow I know I have to go down there, but I don't want to. I'm afraid of what might be waiting for me. The old kings of winter are down there, sitting on their thrones with stone wolves at their feet and iron swords across their laps. But it's not them I'm afraid of. I start down, feeling the walls as I descend, with no torch to light the way. It gets darker and darker until I want to scream." He stopped, frowning, embarrassed. "That's when I always wake up." So this is a reoccurring dream that Jon has. He has this dream quite often, and it usually always ends at this point. So after he tells Sam about it, he dreams of Winterfell again, but this time the dream goes further than what it usually does. Last night he had dreamed the Winterfell dream again. He was wandering the empty castle, searching for his father, descending into the crypts. Only this time the dream had gone further than before. In the dark he'd heard the scrape of stone on stone. When he turned, he saw that the vaults were opening, one after the other, as the dead kings came stumbling from their cold black graves. Jon had woken in pitch dark, his heart hammering. Even when ghosts leapt up on the bed to nuzzle at his face, he could not shake his deep sense of terror. So let's stop right here. There are obvious things going on in this dream and obvious things that this dream symbolizes, but then there are other things that aren't so obvious. So the first thing is that everyone leaving Winterfell, all of the Starks leaving Winterfell, and Winterfell being without a Stark. To me, that jumps right out. Jon looks for everyone and it's empty, including ravens and horses, which alludes to a Stark not being in Winterfell. This is hammered home even further when Jon goes into the crypts and screams that he's not a Stark, which of course has to do with his true parentage. He isn't a Stark, and the truth of that is in the crypts. His mother is in the crypts, and symbolically, he's usually looking for his father in this dream. and he won't find his father in the Crypts of Winterfell, but he will indeed find his mother. I believe these dreams are foreshadowing much more than Jon's parentage, though. It foreshadows the dead kings of winter possibly rising from their tombs. When Jon first enters the crypts, he specifically does not feel afraid of the kings of winter. And we see the vaults that hold their bodies opening and the kings quite literally waking from their slumber. The crypts have been brought up many times and they seem to be super important. We learn about them first in Eddard Stark's first POV chapter. We go down into the crypts with Ned and Robert. He led the way between the pillars and Robert followed wordlessly, shivering in the subterranean chill. It was always cold down here. Their footsteps rang off of stones and echoed in the vaults overhead as they walked among the dead of House Stark. The lords of Winterfell watched them pass. Their likeness were carved into the stones that sealed the tombs. In long rows they sat, blind eyes staring out into eternal darkness, while great stone direwolves curled around their feet. The shifting shadows made the stone figures seem to stir as the living passed by. By ancient custom, an iron longsword had been laid across the lap of each who had been Lord of Winterfell, to keep the vengeful spirits in their crypts. The oldest had long ago rusted away to nothing, leaving only a few red stains where the metal had rested on stone. Ned wondered if that meant those ghosts were free to roam the castle now. He hoped not. The first lords of Winterfell had been men as hard as the land they ruled. In the centuries before the dragon lords came over the sea, they had sworn allegiance to no man, styling themselves the kings in the north. So Jon actually dreams about the Stone Kings quite often. He tells Sam later on when he's talking about his wolf dreams that he doesn't even dream of ghosts anymore, and all of his dreams consist of the Stone Kings and the crypts. But before we can go further, we must go back. Now we need to take a look into the actual Crypts of Winterfell and just what they are and what Winterfell is. The greatest castle of the north is Winterfell, the seat of the Starks since the Dawn Age. Legend says that Brandon the Builder raised Winterfell after the generation-long winter known as the Long Night, to become the stronghold of his descendants, the Kings of Winter. The castle itself is peculiar in that the Starks did not level the ground when laying down the foundations and walls of the castle. Very likely, this reveals that the castle was built in pieces over the years rather than being planned as a single structure. When we are analyzing the magic that allegedly is in Winterfell, I don't think it's every part of Winterfell because Winterfell wasn't built all at one time. The first part of Winterfell, or the oldest part of Winterfell, is the crypts, the Lichyard, and the First Keep. The First Keep is where Bran fell from the tower. It's a tower that's crowned in gargoyles. And then there is the crypts. So the crypts extend underground and are bigger than Winterfell itself. The crypts contain many levels, but the lowest levels are now partially collapsed. So if the children helped with the First Keep and the crypts and the Lichyard, what is the magic that is within these crypts? Is it the same magic that is in the wall or the same magic that's in Storm's End? The magic that's in the wall seems to prevent the dead from passing it. Melisandre says that the ancient magic in the wall of Storm's End prevents shadows from passing. But we don't know what the magic at Winterfell is, but we can assume and guess. So Winterfell was raised around 3 acres of untouched forest. At the center of that is a heart tree, an ancient weirwood over 8,000 years old. So I believe what we call the Crypts of Winterfell is actually an ancient cave of the children of the forest. So we know Bran the Builder built it after the Long Night to become the stronghold of the Stark descendants. But why did he know that his descendants were going to have to fight the White Walkers again? And if that's the case, then what he built? How is it going to help them? So I look at the crypts kind of like this. Anywhere an ancient weirwood is, we should imagine under the weirwood are roots, tunnels of roots extending down and down, like the cave that Bran found himself in beyond the wall. Bran even says as much about the Crypts of Winterfell when Winterfell is burned. Beyond, the tops of the keeps and towers still stood as they had for hundreds of years, and it was hard to tell that the castle had been sacked and burned at all. The stone is strong, Bran told himself. The roots of the trees go deep, and under the ground the kings of winter sit their thrones. So long as those remained, Winterfell remained. So we know that weirwoods can actually extend life, and we have seen examples of this in the cave beyond the wall with both the Children of the Forest and Bloodraven. It makes you wonder, like, are the dead kings a part of that weirwood godhood too? Are there spirits inside the wood, inside Winterfell? We are told on 2 different occasions that the Iron Swords keep the vengeful spirits in their crypts. First in Book 1 by Ned, then again by Theon in Book 5. That king is missing his sword, Lady Dustin observed. It was true. Theon did not recall which king it was, but the long sword he should have held was gone. Streaks of rust remained to show where it had been. The sight disquieted him. He had always heard that the iron in the swords kept the spirits of the dead locked within their tombs. If the sword was missing, there are ghosts in Winterfell, and I am one of them. So Theon also has this very eerie dream about the kings of winter back in Clash of Kings, and I think it screams the kings of winter rising from their tombs. That night he dreamed of the feast Ned Stark had thrown when King Robert came to Winterfell. The hall rang with music and laughter, though the cold winds were rising outside. At first it was all wine and roast meat, and Theon was making japes and eyeing the serving girls and having himself a fine time, until he noticed that the room was growing darker. The music did not seem so jolly then. He heard discords and strange silences and notes that hung in the air, bleeding. Suddenly the wine turned bitter in his mouth, and when he looked up from his cup, he saw that he was dining with the dead. King Robert sat with his guts spilling out on the table from the great gash in his belly, and Lord Eddard was headless beside him. Corpses lined the benches below, gray-brown flesh sloughing off their bones as they raised their cups to toast, worms crawling in and out of holes that were their eyes. He knew them, every one. Jory Cassell and Fat Tom, Porther and Cain and Hullen, the master of horse, and all the others who had ridden south to King's Landing never to return. Micken and Shale sat together, one dripping blood and the other water. Benfred Tallheart and his wild hares filled most of a table. The miller's wife was there as well, and Farland, even the wildling Theon had killed in the Wolfswood the day he saved Bran's life. But there were others with faces he had never known in life, faces he had seen only in stone. The slim, sad girl who wore a crown of pale blue roses and a white gown spattered with gore could only be Lyanna. Her brother Brandon stood beside her, and their father, Lord Rickard, just behind. Along the walls, figures half-seen moved through the shadows, pale shades with long, grim faces. The sight of them sent fear shivering through Theon sharp as a knife. And then the tall doors opened with a crash, and a freezing gale blew down the hall, and Robb came walking out of the night. Greywind stalked beside, eyes burning, and man and wolf alike bled from 100 savage wounds. Theon woke with a scream. So Theon is dreaming that he is feasting with the dead. This is so important, and the Stone Kings are among them. Now, this is a very interesting dream because Robb was not dead at this time, but this dream was indeed prophetic in nature because at the end, Robb enters the Feast of the Dead with Greywind, and Greywind and Robb have the same wounds. Theon being at this feast for the dead may also foreshadow Theon's death. But let's look at this feast of the dead when Jon tells Sam he isn't dreaming of ghosts anymore. I don't even dream of ghosts anymore. All my dreams are of the crypts, of the stone kings on their thrones. Sometimes I hear Rob's voice and my father's, as if they were at a feast. But there's a wall between us, and I know that no place has been set for me. This may also foreshadow Jon's survival. But what's more important is that both Jon and Theon have indeed seen the dead in Winterfell. Theon also says this about the ghosts in Winterfell. He was trapped here with the ghost, the old ghosts from the crypts and the younger ones that he had made himself. Mikken and Farland, Guinevere Red Rose, Agar, Gelmar the Grim, the miller's wife from Acorn Water and her 2 young sons, and all the rest. My work, my ghost. They are all here, and they are angry. He thought of the crypts and those missing swords. So there seems to be some definite foreshadowing that not only the Kings of Winter are still in Winterfell, but also Ned, Brandon, Lyanna, Torrhen Stark, Aldrich Snowbeard. I mean, all of these legendary people and kings are there waiting. But for what? Could the magics of the crypts be to keep the dead in or to keep the dead out? I'm not sure, but I have a guess. So George R.R. Martin dropped that Firewhite article last year, and it brought another element into play, because what if Jon could raise the Kings of the Winter, or the Ghosts of Winterfell, to fight the Night King's army? I know it sounds crazy, but let me explain. These characters aren't having these dreams for no reason. These dreams have purpose, just as the Crypts of Winterfell have purpose. It's not put in the story just to be put in the story. So I looked at George R.R. Martin's inspiration, and 2 of those inspirations I think we should talk about. One of those inspirations is J.R.R. Tolkien, and the other is Norse mythology. So the Dead King's feasting is very much like Valhalla. Valhalla is like a great feast that never ends. In Norse mythology, when warriors die, they go to Valhalla and await Ragnarok. So during Ragnarok, they will aid Odin during the events of Ragnarok to help him fight or whatever. Now, you might say, well, what is Ragnarok? So Ragnarok is like the twilights of the gods, the basically end of the world and rebirth of the world. So Ragnarok is like a series of apocalyptic events that will define the end of the world, where giants of frost and fire will together fight the gods in a final battle that will ultimately destroy the planet, and then the planet will have to be reborn. But anyway, the big general idea is people that have died come back from Valhalla to fight in Ragnarok. There is so much Norse influence in Game of Thrones, like it's unreal. My first video ever was actually Norse comparisons in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Actually, I don't recommend that you watch it because I didn't know what I was doing at that time, editing wise. So I definitely think that the Kings of Winter could be like in a Valhalla place where they can be called back or summoned back to help the living fight the dead. Now, the next G.R.R. Martin inspiration we should look at is Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings influence on the story. We need to consider the dead men of Dunharrow. The dead of Dunharrow were oathbreakers. They made a pact or a promise to help Isildur, but then they refused to fight Sauron. They went and hid instead of helping anyone. They went and hid in the mountains like, we're not helping anyone. So as a punishment, Isildur cursed them and they can't find peace or be free until they fulfilled their oath. So Aragorn is Isildur's heir. He summons them to fulfill their oath and to fight with him during the War of the Ring against Sauron. So I've said before that Jon definitely has a lot of parallels with Aragorn, and I am working on that video. That video should be out shortly, but I definitely think given George's influence and everything that the dreams have foreshadowed, I definitely think that Jon can just resurrect the kings of winter, or at least summon them to help him fight the Night King. It would be like a ghost army, and this is why I think Jon keeps having these reoccurring dreams of the Stone Kings awakening from their crypts. And this is why the crypts have been built with magic, and this is why Theon rambles about the ghosts that are in Winterfell, and this is why Jon's direwolf is named Ghost, #FreeGhost. But I definitely think it's very possible that Jon will raise a ghost army of Kings of Winter to fulfill their oath. But what do you think? Because I could be wrong. But every time I read and reread these chapters, I can't help but think these kings will awaken and rise. And I wonder if the horn that wakes the sleepers is the one to awaken them. Or maybe the weirwood will need to be fed with blood sacrifice. We shall see. But as always, thanks for watching. Thanks to everyone that supports me on Patreon. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and join the sweet summer family. Okay, my sweet summer children, have a good day.
Shame.